Friday morning. Welcome inside Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale, Pennsylvania. I'm Matt Geica. This is my show, Geike's Got Game, coming to you on the day after Thanksgiving, otherwise known as Black Friday. Always sounds so ominous, but the sun is shining. It's post-holiday. I'm in that post-holiday bliss mode, even though I have to work this weekend down at the island and up in Mercyhurst University. But neither here nor there. I consider it a joy to be with you on this morning, on this beautiful morning. And I hope that you enjoy your experiencing the show. Brian Crawford is alongside here, and we have plenty to get to in the next hour or so. So hang tight. Later in this hour, I want to deliver an appreciation for what I think is the least surprising storyline in Pittsburgh sports this year, but one that deserves kudos. Even though I don't talk about the sporting question very often, you might be able to guess what I'm referring to, but I do want to tip the cap, tap the stick, do whatever the ritual might be to say congratulations and well done on a midseason turnaround. Also, I tend to kill cliches on this show. That's something that I pride myself in, taking care of some housekeeping in making sure that we're all thinking the right way and we're all not just relying upon the past and relying upon these old threadbare methods of perceiving reality, I guess I'll put it that way. So whether I ban them or kill them, I'm not a fan of cliches, and I have found that there is a cliche about watching hockey live that is a lie these days, and I'll describe further in just a little bit. But to start today's show, a little bit more of a traditional sports talk radio feel, as we'll get into the plight and the upcoming fight for the Pittsburgh Penguins as they try to get back into playoff contention, try to get back into Stanley Cup contention. I think they can, but I also think there's one big challenge there that stands out above the rest, and I will dig right into that in just a moment. But before we get into all of that, I want to remind you that I'm on social media at Matt Geica Media on Facebook. You may be watching the show right now on that Facebook page. And if you are, thank you for joining me there. But we are streaming on the River's Edge audio feed. riversedgepgh.com is where you can find that. And as always, I'll be taking your input on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Matt Geica, MattGajTKA, and I gave you a tease of today's show over there. I usually do about a half an hour before I go on the air, so if you do want to preview, I have it in that spot in addition to Facebook. If you're just trolling around social, whether you're working today or standing in line to pick up a television set or something of that ilk, if you're looking for a great deal, hopefully I can kill some time for you if you're out there. Well, hopefully not driving, but if you're out there in a line, if you are experiencing your fellow humans in a much more intimate way than you would like to on this Black Friday, stuck in traffic or what have you, then I'm happy to help kill the hour for you and maybe engage your brain in a different way than you might be used to if you are typically experiencing sports talk radio from a more traditional sense. As for right now, though, let's talk some hockey. And it's that time of the year, right? And I feel like in the summertime, I jump all around, and I go from individual sports to team sports. Didn't talk a ton about baseball this summer. But once we turn the calendar page into about October, that's when I start thinking about pucks. And with the Penguins, I find them rather compelling this year because they're not off to an awesome start. They are still, if you factor in overtime and shootout losses, they're below 500. And I looked at the Metropolitan Division standings about a week ago, and I was talking about how they seemed a little topsy-turvy. You saw some teams at the bottom or near the bottom, and the Penguins, the Devils, the Capitals were right in the middle of it. Those were teams that I thought would be right at the top of the division standings at this point in the year. So there is some small sample size vagaries to sort out here. But even right now, you look at it, the New York Rangers are in second place in the Metro. The Capitals have risen up to number 3. And there are the Penguins way down there, tied with the Flyers and the Devils for last in the Metro. The Penguins at 8-4 even after that 5-1 win of the over the Stars on Wednesday night in that traditional Thanksgiving Eve home game for the Pens. And I didn't realize how often they actually do play at home on Thanksgiving. I believe it's 42 out of 46 times they've played on the day before Thanksgiving that it's been either at Civic/Mellon Arena or Consol Energy Center/PPG Paints Arena. And I was happy to be in the house there with my wife Jillian and my 2-year-old son Lucas. And I'll get into that in a moment about the live experience. But to see Sidney Crosby come back, to see Derek Brassard healthy, to see Evgeny Malkin doing his thing, made me realize this Penguins team is not as far away from legit cup contention, from being right at the top of the Eastern Conference in terms of ability to win and to go deep in the playoffs. It's not that far away from that, as some might have you believe. And there was plenty of hand-wringing as the Penguins lost, 8 of 9 or somewhere in that range. You factor in a couple of shootout or overtime losses, and it looked pretty bad for the Pens. They are still 2-6-2 in their last 10, but I think it was Seth Rohrabaugh, the Athletic, who tweeted this out the other night. Well, the Penguins are 6-1-2 when Crosby, Malkin, and Brassard are down the middle of that line chart. They're 2-7-2 when at least one of them has been out. So it strikes me as very premature to try to pass a verdict on this team without one of the big three centers in the lineup, because that was the plan this year, was to hang on to Derek Brassard, who was acquired last spring from the Montreal Canadiens, and move on to this year with those three guys right down the middle. And I hope that all of us can realize that we're still not even a quarter of the way through the season here. We're 20 games into an 82-game slate, and the Penguins have only had those three gentlemen down the middle in 9 of those 20 games. So realize that if you want to try to pass judgment and say the game has passed them by, I saw that, I heard that plenty as the Pens were in their struggles for a couple of weeks, and they still might be, of course. They just have the one win, and they have to play again tonight against the Devils. But if you say the game's passed them by, they're not as fast as they used to be, I won't disagree with either one of those. I won't disagree with the second one, at least. I don't think the game's passed them by. I think when they don't have their big three in the lineup, or one of their big three in the lineup at least, then they're going to be a reduced team. They're going to be a lesser team, and that's the case for any team across the league. And I realize injuries are part of it, but if you want to try to judge the team building, if you want to try to judge the coaching or the performance of this squad from a player perspective, then you have to be fair and say when they're at full strength or close to it with 87, 71, and 19, they're 6-1-2. They've lost once in 9 regulation games. And I believe Seth broke this down further. In fact, he did. The Penguins are scoring nearly 5 goals per game when they have their top 3 centers in. So for me, I need to see a lot more of this team as it was intended to be constructed. And I've criticized the Jack Johnson signing on the back line, on the blue line. I've criticized Connor Sherry being traded to Buffalo to free up cap space for that type of a move. And I wasn't terribly crazy about moving Carl Hagelin out, although I do understand the benefit of bringing in someone who might be able to score a little bit more in Tanner Pearson at the expense of taking away some of that team speed on the wings. So there are always adjustments to be made, and sometimes one team isn't working out like you thought it would, even though you roll over most of the same characters, like we have seen in the early going this season. But for me, the skaters are not the issue for the Penguins, and you probably see where I'm going with this one right now. As Matt Murray is now headed back to the IR, back to the injured reserve, for the 9th time in his career, he will miss time due to an injury. And if you're thinking, wow, Matt Murray has not been up in the NHL that long, that's true. He just got called up late in the 2015-16 season for good. So it was March of 2016 that he established himself as an NHL goaltender, Matt Murray did. And so we're not even 3 years into it, and he's already suffered 9 injuries. And some of these longer-term ones of the lower body, he suffered one last year when he got run into by the Flyers' Jakub Voracek. Right around this time last year, in fact, he missed 4 or 5 weeks. And this time around, it seems like more of a nagging thing that the Penguins were surprised by the severity of the injury when they formally had it checked out just this week. So Murray on the IR, that means Tristan Jarry is called up again, and Jarry filled in quite well for Murray last year right at this time. And that's about the time I thought, well, maybe Tristan Jarry could be the goalie of the future in Pittsburgh. And I realize the Matt Murray situation, it still touches on frayed nerves for many of you out there, and I understand, because Murray basically replaced Marc-Andre Fleury, who was playing well when Murray was on the rise up through the system. Fleury seemed to be a different goaltender with the assistance of his goaltending coach, Mike Bales, who has since moved on to Carolina. But Fleury, after maybe the 2012-13 season, hit a flush run of form there. He was looking good, and at the same time, I understand not wanting to pay a goaltender as much as Fleury was getting paid. What was it, over $5 million a year for many, many years after he was let go by the Penguins in favor of a younger guy, because the Penguins have expenditures up the middle, those big three I was talking about, especially Crosby and Malkin, and then Chris Letang on the blue line too. That adds up to quite a bit of a cap hit, cumulatively speaking. So I understand wanting to go with the younger, cheaper option, and really Murray had given you no reason to worry about his longevity, or at least about his performance level, because of how well he played in the playoffs, and also in a tandem with Marc-Andre Fleury in the 2016-17 season. But with Murray not playing so well lately, and Matt Murray is well below average for NHL goaltenders, if you just look at save percentage over the past 1.5 seasons, honestly, he's been AHL level, AHL caliber. If you just look at the raw numbers this season, an .877 save percentage, and looking at last year, it was a .907, which doesn't sound terrible, but it's still several percentage points below NHL average. So whether it's injury or whether it's something else, whether it's the league getting a book on Matt Murray, I don't know about that. I'm not sure how much that actually happens in a fast-moving sport like hockey. I think it's a part of it, but it's not a huge part of it. Whether it's some degradation of skill, I don't know. But for me, it's not about the Penguins not playing fast, as we heard over the past month or so. It's not about the Penguins not being fast anymore. It's not about the Penguins getting older. It's not about Mike Sullivan losing his coaching touch. It's more about in the net. And if the Penguins had gotten league average goaltending this year, they'd be right in the mix for the top spot in the Metro Division, challenging the Blue Jackets and the Rangers, and now the Capitals up near the top. And even so, the Penguins are still just 6 points out of first place with a game in hand on the Blue Jackets. So not that division standings are the end-all, be-all for this team. This is always a squad now in this contending era for the Penguins that just wants to get going at its best late in the season. So there's still time for that. All you have to do is qualify for the playoffs, and hopefully you get a higher seed and you can have that home ice advantage. But I think that reductive approach to the regular season might hurt them in terms of motivation early on, but I also think that this team is not playing that badly, and goaltending has let it down. And all due respect to Casey DeSmith, I don't see him as a long-term solution as a number one starter for a cup-contending team. Maybe it's Tristan Jarry, but he hasn't really gotten that much of a run in the NHL. Maybe that's for a reason. Perhaps the team feels like he could still use more seasoning as a pro down in the AHL compared to sitting the bench as Matt Murray's backup or even as a tandem situation. So all these things are decided behind closed doors, and we don't know everything that there is to know, and I'm not a goaltending expert. I'll admit that much. But if you just look at performance from both traditional and advanced measures, Matt Murray hasn't been anywhere close to where they need him to be. So if Murray is either not as good of a goalie as he looked in his first 2 seasons, or alternatively, the injuries are taking their toll, either way, it casts doubt on his ability to be the guy in Pittsburgh long term. And the one bright side of this is that Matt Murray is only signed for 1 more year at $3.75 million next season, part of that 3-year extension that the Penguins gave him, kind of a bridge deal, if you will, kind of a prove-it type of a deal, if you will, to say, okay, you performed well, but we haven't seen it long-term in the regular season, and we haven't seen it year after year in the postseason either. So we'll give you 3 years, and this deal was signed a couple of seasons ago, back in October of 2016, and I've gotten on Jim Rutherford a lot for some decisions he's made in the last 2 years, but I think that Matt Murray 3-year contract was perfect. And now that gives the Penguins enough time to evaluate. And I don't blame them if they're feeling a bit perplexed right now based on not just the performance level of Murray, but also the ability to stay on the ice. So whether it's to Smith or Jarry for the next several weeks, or probably a combination of both, most likely, it's another opportunity for the Penguins to see an alternative option in net. And it's a chance for the Penguins to get better goaltending overall. DeSmith made a couple of huge saves against the Stars the other night. Yeah, 5-1 win. It was a blowout from the start. The Penguins got 3 in the first. But there were moments, the game could have turned. It could have turned into that game against the Sabres on Monday night when the Penguins blew a 4-1 lead and lost in overtime. So I don't want to minimize DeSmith's offerings there. And really, DeSmith has been quite good in a limited sample in the NHL. So there's an opportunity for him or either Tristan Jarry to step in here. And that's the big thing I think the Penguins have to get figured out before the end of the season. And going into next year and beyond, who's going to be the guy in net? It's rather important, even though at times it can be tough to figure out, and it can change from week to week and month to month. I think that's what Mike Sullivan was getting at when he was asked after Wednesday's win whether Matt Murray was still his number one guy. And Sullivan blanched at the question. He thought it was off base because in his mind, I'm sure Murray is still his number one guy. But also, I believe there has to be some doubt creeping into the Penguins' decision-makers' minds on this topic. So it's goaltending for me that's been the big issue and the one that I think will rear its head, presumably into the future as the Penguins are able to stay healthy, if they are able to stay healthy. And once they get Justin Schultz back in March, I still think from a skater's perspective, from a forwards and defenseman perspective, this is still a team that's right up there in terms of ability to win a Stanley Cup and bring home a fourth Stanley Cup for this core group, which would really put them in that rarefied atmosphere with teams like the Oilers of the 80s and the Islanders of the early 80s, in fact. So that's still in play for me, but goaltending is the big question, not team speed. I think the Penguins are plenty fast still. When they move the puck well, they look great. As we saw the other night, they made an adjustment on the breakouts, a little more puck support, a little more a tighter formation coming out of their own end, and they looked awesome. I know it was a depleted Stars team, and they were facing a backup goaltender in Anton Khudobin, but the Penguins were all over Dallas, and it wasn't even a contest in that one. That's more of the Penguins we're used to seeing, particularly at home. Now, I will agree, and I alluded to this earlier in this segment, I will agree that they have gotten a little bit slower. They traded Connor Sherry for Jack Johnson, essentially, this past summer, and they just recently dealt Carl Hagelin for Tanner Pearson. Pearson's not slow by any means, but he's more of a deliberate player when it comes to moving his feet. He can still move well enough to score in the NHL, as we've seen with the LA Kings over the past several seasons. But there was, no mistaking, a minor speed downgrade. For the most part, though, I think this team should be moving almost as well as the back-to-back champions did in 2016 and 17. Yeah, there's been a couple of years tacked on to guys like Phil Kessel and Crosby and Malkin and Letang, but I think Letang's moving as well as he ever has. I don't see any degradation in foot speed from the big three up front either. Now, that could just be my own bias, and it's hard to tell with your eyes. We don't have speedometers on these guys, but overall, I think this team is still in a pretty good spot to play fast and to play that skill and speed game. So I don't think they have to readjust. I don't think they have to take a step back. As Mike Sullivan put it, I don't think there's anyone out there trying to play slow in the NHL. Or I don't think there's any team out there that's successful that is playing slow. You mostly associate that with teams that are struggling, like, say, the LA Kings right now, who are getting older. They're older than the Penguins are, and they never had that high-level talent that the Penguins have. And as Josh Yohe of The Athletic, my former colleague, wrote about this week, the Penguins don't have the problem that the Blackhawks have, where their stars haven't produced at the top level of the game in recent years. Kane and Taves have fallen off in Chicago, but in Pittsburgh, you still have Crosby and Malkin and Kessel producing at well over a point-per-game pace. So all that adds up to me saying the biggest problem is in net. It sounds easy, it sounds reductive, but I think it's true, at least as far as I can tell, through almost a quarter of the 2018-19 NHL season. Thanks for listening to Gike's Got Game. Thanks for watching if you're tuning in on Facebook Live or on riversedgepgh.com/live. When I come back, I want to kill a cliche regarding watching hockey in person. I think that, to tease it a little bit more, the product at home is much better than it's ever been. Even though I still prefer to be there in person, you can see so much more. I don't think the gap is nearly as great as it once was. And I'll describe why on the other side of this break on the River's Edge.
Are you hungry for science? I'm Carissa Sedor.
And I'm Ralph Crew.
And we host the Carnegie Science Center's podcast, Science News and Cues.
Also known as Snack.
Join us twice a month as we talk about exciting science news, answer science questions submitted by listeners, that's you, and dive deep into a cool topic every episode.
Curious about exoplanets, glowing animals, or even your own poop? Well, do we have the show for you?
We also feature special guests from octopuses to famous YouTube science stars to NASA scientists.
Join us on Snack, and remember,
Stay
hungry for science.
Wow, a Christmas song on the River's Edge. We don't have too many of those, just a couple in the mix, Brian Crawford tells me. Here from Mr. Small's Theater, this is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge. River's Edge, PGH.com is your home for local music all the time, except no substitutes. And we are online 24/7. Audio stream is at the website, and you can access us wherever you access your on-demand audio. So I'll leave you to your devices quite literally in that case. And you're probably picking up some new devices if you're out shopping on this Black Friday. I know it's a cliche to do that. And speaking of cliches, I want to tackle one when it comes to the sports viewing experience in just a moment. But I want to say thank you, first of all, to everyone watching on Facebook. We have Jared, we have Marlene, and hey, my mom's there too. She's quite the faithful viewer and listener, as you might imagine. Hello to all out there, whether you've commented on Facebook or not. And as I mentioned, always willing to take your input, whether it be there or on Twitter. I check both during the course of the show. Yes, I can multitask a little bit. I don't try to do it too much. I've read that multitasking isn't really multitasking at all. It's just switching your attention from one thing to the next. So you're never really focused on two things at once. And we have limitations for our feeble simian brains, and that's one of them, even though the modern media framework does challenge that quite a bit. In our first segment, I talked about, there's no we unless it's a royal we here. I discussed why I thought the Penguins don't have an issue in terms of team speed, in terms of playing fast, and their competitive advantage, as Mike Sullivan would call it, that they've had over the past 2 or 3 years. The whole concept when Mike Sullivan took over, I think there was a misconception here that all of a sudden they became fast. Well, yeah, they added some younger guys like Brian Rust, who could move. Connor Sherry, definitely a faster guy. Jake Gensel, probably a little bit faster than average, right? I would say. And Carl Hagelin came aboard too. So there was a change in personnel. But what Mike Sullivan did, and I charted this during the 15-16 season after he took over from Mike Johnston, what Sullivan did was to amp up the team's approach coming up the ice. They weren't carrying it out of their own zone anymore or as much. They were getting the puck to their forwards quickly. Well, there's always an adjustment to make because then teams counter that. And Sullivan, in the playoffs, we've seen him especially, he has made changes within a series to gain the upper hand tactically. And it may not be easy for those of us on the outside to see. This isn't football where you change formations and it's very obvious and you have plenty of time to look at it and say, oh, they're doing this differently, or on defense they're lining up this way and the coverage is a little bit different. I'm not saying it's always easy to figure that out in football, but it's a little bit easier. In hockey, it all happens on the fly, and there could be some subtle things that are occurring, perhaps off the screen, which is why I was fortunate and I appreciated the opportunity to watch the Penguins Cup run in 2016-17 in person, because when you see the whole ice, it does make a difference, and you can get a greater perspective on that. But the cliche I want to tackle, making the segue here very smoothly, the cliche I want to tackle here today regarding watching hockey live is that it's not as not as much of a divide between watching hockey live and on TV or on your tablet or on your device as it used to be. Number one, the biggest change for me still to this day, and I was reminded of this yesterday when I was watching an old Penguins game in standard definition, is high definition TV. You can see everything. The puck no longer gets lost anywhere on the ice. Yeah, it might be a little bit of a blur when someone fires a slap shot or something like that, but for the most part, you know where the puck is. You can follow it if you're watching on TV. Let's not take that for granted, because in the 90s, early 2000s, or even part of this decade, if you didn't have a high-definition set or a device, or, as the technology has gotten better, there are more pixels available. There are more technologies that allow us to see everything that we previously could only see in person. So that part of it has improved. So I think that's a huge part. Also, I think just the way we consume sports now is different. We're usually closer to the screen. We're not necessarily watching on our televisions in the living room. We're watching on phones. We're watching highlights. We're watching GIFs, which all translate very well, I think, to the modern media environment. It's not so much where you're watching an entire game as you are catching the best of the best. Or if you're scrolling through social media, you see, oh, wow, Sid scored a great goal the other night against the Stars, which he did in his comeback from injury. And you can appreciate that over and over again. You can see it in slow-mo. There's more of that, more super slow-mo. So just generally, the presentation and the technology has gotten a lot better from home, from not in the arena. And I caught myself watching the other night when I was at PPG Paints in the stands up in the upper bowl. I caught myself watching on the video board not more than I was the entire ice, but there was a lot of that going on because you wanted to catch replays, you wanted to appreciate how things happen, and especially in a sport that moves as quickly as hockey does, even when you can't see all 10 skaters and the two goaltenders on the ice in person, it still benefits you to look back and say, oh, so that's what really happened. And the Crosby goal was a great example of that because you could appreciate more the skill it took to kick that rebound to his stick and pop it in. I was pretty sure that's what happened watching it live at the far end of the ice, but I wasn't entirely certain. And unless you're in a perfect seat at the arena, I still think there's room for some augmentation and replay, and you can appreciate it better with some artificial enhancements, shall we say. And I think it used to be, no doubt it used to be, that being there in person was unbeatable. It was the best way to proselytize for how great hockey is. And I still believe that. I still think you want to be in the building. But don't get me wrong, there's no bad seat at PPG Paints Arena, but we were up very near the top of the upper bowl, all the way down at one end. So at the far end of the ice, it's pretty distant. And being there with my wife and our young son Lucas, going to his first game at age 2, I wouldn't blame him if he didn't really recognize what was going on compared to when we're at home, whether I'm watching on a laptop and he's all excited about seeing the hockey, or the chichi as he calls it. He's still trying to figure out the word, but you can tell he appreciates the sport, but maybe not so much in person because it was so far away. It wasn't like you could reach out and touch it. So I almost feel like for a younger generation of hockey fans, they might be a little bit let down by the in-arena experience unless you're right there next to the action. So the old cliche that hockey is far and away better in person is not exactly true anymore, I don't think, just because of the advancements in technology and all the ways that we can experience hockey. And let me bring in Brian Crawford here for a moment, because he just alerted me to the fact that I said there's not a bad seat at PPG Paints Arena. You say
there's one bad seat.
You found the one bad seat. So
it's a really, really bad seat.
Where is the bad seat?
So it's actually a fun story. We went in there. We got there way early for a game. We were doing the student rush tickets, which student rush is great because it's a roll of the dice. Sometimes you get the best seat in the house. Sometimes you get the one bad seat in the house.
Right.
And we got there early, and we're standing up in the standing room only section, which I'm actually a big fan of, typically, because you get to look over everyone.
Where is that exactly at
It's
PPG
right
Paints?
along the ring of the upper level, so
Okay.
you're looking over everyone,
Okay.
which I'm okay with. But there are a few standing room only sections that are behind a handicap seating area.
Oh,
And they
okay.
should just eliminate the section. Like I don't have a problem. Obviously, we want to make it accessible for people with disabilities. But the standing room section behind the platform, literally, if you're on the end, which we were, near the goalpost, all you can see is the goalie on the other side of the arena. That's it. And I mean, not because there's someone standing in your way. Like, the platform has completely blocked off access to see anything but that goalie. And we had to watch the game on the Jumbotron. And I remember I was so poor at the time, and my friend offered me these tickets, and I spent the last money I had. I didn't have enough money for food after that. I spent the last bit of money I had before payday to get those Penguin tickets because I was, a big fan. I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And I'm there, and we get there early, and these couple women come up and tap us on the shoulder, and they say, "Would you like to be on the on-ice entertainment?" It was New Year's Eve as well. So we said,
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
So we go down there, and it's the game where you bowl.
Sure.
They
yeah.
shoot you. You're a human bowling ball into these pins on the ice. We go down there. I'm actually on Root Sports. I have this giant hat, like a New Year's hat, on top of my helmet, and
Okay.
they show me spinning into the bins. I ended up winning, for every pin you knock down, a $25 Giant Eagle gift card. I ended up making money at the game. I actually made money. I think it was like a $30-some ticket. Came out of there with over $100 in Giant Eagle gift cards. Paid for the food. So a true fan, put your faith in the Penguins, and you'll get your next few meals paid for.
Yeah. So for a moment, your seat wasn't that bad. All of a sudden,
no,
even
it was
though
great.
The game wasn't going on,
and it was a really good TV to watch it on.
Obviously. So what do you think about what I'm saying, though? Do you agree that it's not quite? Like I said, I couldn't blame the younger generation for still wanting to get replays on their device to check things out on a closer view, because if you are way up at the top, as you know, it's nothing beats being there to experience the atmosphere. But you just want to appreciate the play on the ice. I think it still does stand to use some enhancement, whether it be through your cell phone or on the big screen there at the arena.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really into this whole replay short clip generation. I like to see the way a game is played out. To me,
well, so do I. I don't want to.
I know, but a lot of people, you're right. A lot of people
now.
now just, I know you don't, but a lot of people, you're right. They just go and they watch the clips. NFL Red Zone for the NFL, for example, where all it is a show of the big plays, and people will sit there and watch that all day. To me, that's kind of boring. It's just all there's no climax. It's just all fluff. There's no meat and potatoes. And to me, what's the point of a game if all it is you might as well just have an all-star game every week or a shootout every week. And to me, that's not as much fun as a full game. So you're right. People are into all of that, and some people don't watch the games. They just watch the highlights. But for me, I don't watch the highlights. I don't have any interest, I guess, in watching highlights unless I see the game itself and see the entire thing play out. That's the way I watch sports.
Well, right. I think I've been warped a little bit by this current media atmosphere, if you want to put it that way, with all the content that we have, with the constant refreshing of Twitter and Facebook and league websites. It's all well and good, but I caught myself. I almost missed a goal the other night because I was watching the video board to see what happened on the previous play. So there is some of that where I think we can afford to resist a little bit against that sort of thing.
And the thing is those replays will always be there after the game.
That's true, yes.
So you can watch the game fully and then go back and watch. And that 30-second clip has been uploaded to YouTube before the game is over, so you can continue to go back and rewatch it right afterwards.
And intermission is always there, too, so there's never really an excuse at a hockey game. You can always – there's no lack for downtime then, so you can catch up in that way. But it is interesting. I don't think – I'm just saying the gap has closed. And
you're right. Yeah.
Overall, I hear people talk about not wanting to go to football games anymore. I hear that a lot because of the constant media timeouts and with the way that we are spoiled with seeing replays and with how much replay is a part of football. Football is almost designed to be consumed on TV, if you look at it, because you have, 30, 40 seconds between plays if they're not running a hurry-up offense. So that's when you go back and you look at that play and then you set up the next one. So hockey doesn't really lend itself to that, so I think the in-arena experience for hockey will still always be superior because there's just like you say, the roller coaster of it. It goes up and down, and there might be a lull here or there, or maybe a play that sets up something further down the line, but you can't take your eyes off it because you never really know.
Yeah, not only that, you look at football and you have to deal with the elements as a fan.
Right, so it's cold out maybe, it's raining, it's snowing.
I mean, it's a little
windy.
chilly in the arena, but you can throw on a jacket and be okay, whereas at Heinz Field, it can be nice out or there could be huge winds blowing through and crushing you. So I think you have to factor that in as well, and I agree completely with the NFL. There are so many breaks. I always laugh because anytime I tell people that I'm a soccer fan, the response I always get is, oh, it's too slow for me. And they're a rabid football fan, and I just kind of look at them cross-eyed like, you're talking about a game where they literally go on break after every single play, and you're going to tell me that that's fast-paced? A 60-minute game that's stretched out over 4 hours is fast-paced?
Well, when they actually play, it's fast-paced, but you're right. Soccer's like hockey in that way, where hockey has more stoppages. Soccer, technically the clock never stops in soccer, so you have that. You're right, it's a difference in perspective in that way, because something could always happen in a soccer game, whereas in football you can look away, you can go get a drink, you can check out a replay, like I said, you can go to social media. So I understand why football remains very popular in that way, because you don't have to be locked in for so long. But I enjoy being locked in on a game.
Makes it fun.
I like that. That makes it more of an escape. It makes it more of the entertainment product I think that it was intended to be. And like we said, in soccer you have a halftime, and in hockey you have 2 intermissions, so it's not like you have to stay completely zoned in on it for what, 2.5 hours?
Yeah. I do want to say one thing real quick.
Sure.
Speaking of sports, a bigger, more intense contact sport is happening right now with Black Friday, where more people die every year than in the NFL or NHL.
Well, yeah,
So
right.
More people die every year in the combat arena of going for gadgets.
The combat zone is going on. I feel very safe in here right now. I'll put it that way. I'm
Well,
not
luckily
involved
there's-
in that at all.
Luckily, the cafe doesn't open until noon. Watch out then, because people will be coming in for their coffee,
Oh,
pounding
boy.
down the door. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
right, to get ready for, well, it'll be round 2 by then, because
Yeah.
obviously people have been up for all hours of the night here tonight. So maybe we don't kill this cliche altogether, but I say that the live experience isn't quite as far ahead as it used to be in terms of hockey or whatever. And especially when you're a young one like Lucas at age 2. It took me until age 13 to go to my first NHL game, first of all, so he's way ahead of where I was. So I knew he wasn't going to totally appreciate it like he does the hockey on my laptop that we watch or on our television in the living room. But, then again, I was not into hockey at his age. I wasn't into sports at all until about 11 or 12. So I'm not going to get on my parents for not dragging me to the igloo against my will way back then. So at least Lucas has a head start, and he understands, well, that's what we're watching on TV. I think that's important, too, to establish for the young ones. Yes, everything is not experienced through a screen, and real things do happen in front of your eyes in real life, whether it be sporting events or otherwise. This is Gike's Got Game. We're moving on to the third period. I want to talk about the least surprising Pittsburgh sports storyline of the fall, or at least it should have been the least surprising if we had any idea of past precedent and appreciated that. So we'll discuss that, and we'll close out the show coming up next on the River's Edge.
Hey, this is David from Pet Clinic, broadcasting from Mr. Small's Theater. You are listening to the River's Edge Radio Network.
Back to wrap it up on Gike's Got Game. Thank you for joining me today on the River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com. Again, riversedgepgh.com. I am Matt Geica. This is my show, Gike's Got Game. A lot of hockey talk to start. Well, the first segment was about the play on the ice. The second segment was about experiencing it as a fan. I just want to say I really enjoyed having my young one there with us in the stands on Wednesday night. That traditional Thanksgiving Eve game. I haven't been to one as a fan, I think, since 2005. I was thinking back. I haven't gone to a lot of games as a fan at the new building, so I'm still kind of exploring it from that perspective. I've been to, well, Lord, let me look back at the last 2 or 3 years when I was covering the team on a more consistent basis. I probably went to 60, 80 games at PPG Paints Arena as a media member, as someone who entered in the administrative entrance and then shot up the elevator all the way up to press row. So that's a different experience, though. To experience it as a fan is a totally different side of the coin, and I'm happy to see it that way. I think it always helps, and I bounce back and forth now between Pittsburgh sports fan and Pittsburgh sports media. Now I'm somewhere in between, I suppose. Still working in media relations at Robert Morris University. But as far as the big three are concerned, I talk about them on this show. I write about them and I tweet about them occasionally. And I post some analysis on them occasionally, but I'm not as connected to it from a media perspective. So I'm leaning more back toward the fan side. And I just appreciate the fan perspective, I think, more than I did for the last couple of years. So it's always good to get different experiences, right? And we can try to empathize and bridge the gap, but overall, if we don't have those experiences, it's tough to really relate. And I think in the past, when I was up there on press row, I would say, well, why are the fans not necessarily engaged with every moment of the action on the ice? Well, for one, maybe they have a 2-year-old with them and they're trying to make sure that they're under control. Not that Lucas is a bad behavior by any means, but there's that. And then there's also, like I said, trying to check out replays and trying to figure out what just happened. A lot of times it's not the easiest thing in the world in a sport like hockey, even if you are a veteran hockey watcher like myself. I think I've watched I think I've followed the Penguins closely now for 20 years. So I've seen a lot, but still, it's not always the easiest in that way. That's why we love the game, right? Because it moves quickly, but also it can pass us by, and it can lead us to perhaps not be as completely locked into every movement of the puck as we might like to be, whether it be for that reason or for extenuating circumstances. Thanks again for watching, by the way, even though I may have been picking my nose as we went to break on the last timeout. I was informed of that from home. Thanks, Jillian, for the heads up. Hey, my nose is itchy. It's winter. It happens. We're all fighting off some colds and whatnot. I had a sinus infection I went through, and when you have a young son at home, a young child at home, the incubator for disease can crank to a higher gear. But I'm feeling pretty great, actually, all things considered. Day after Thanksgiving, not in any kind of a food coma. Hope you're feeling similarly awake and aware for the start of your extended weekend. Or, well, I guess if you were off yesterday, like most people were, then the weekend has already begun. Really, Thanksgiving, again, gets underappreciated in the grand scheme, doesn't it? Because of the fact that it's on Thursday. Most of us have Friday, if not completely off, and at least somewhat off in my case. And then it leads right into the weekend. So why doesn't Thanksgiving get the run-up that Halloween does now? Halloween's a random nonsense holiday, and it gets a whole month where people are shopping and decorating for. Thanksgiving gets like a couple of days where people pay attention to it, and then we move on to Christmas. If you haven't already moved on to Christmas, which is ridiculous in its own right, if you celebrate Christmas or you're getting into it before Thanksgiving, I don't want to be associated with you. So neither here nor there. I don't know where that rant came from, but we'll consider that part of the overtime here on Gike's Got Game. Back to sports before I sign off for another week here. The least surprising storyline in Pittsburgh sports is not related to the Penguins, maybe struggling at the start of this season, even though I didn't love the team. I liked the team coming into the year. I didn't love the team. Some of the moves in the offseason I felt weakened it, but I'm still surprised that they're right at the bottom of the Metropolitan Division through almost a quarter of the year. And I'm not talking about the Pirates not making the playoffs, obviously. I was pleasantly surprised by the Riverhounds making the playoffs and by putting together one of the better seasons in team history. I kind of thought it would take another year under the new management, under head coach Bob Lilly, before they really access that potential, but give them credit. They were ahead of schedule this year, in my view. No, the team that has surprised me the most, even though I've barely watched their games, is the Steelers, because I don't talk about them much on this show, but I have been paying attention to the results at the very least, and I've seen some plays here or there, and I'm well aware of the trajectory of last week's game at Jacksonville, where they were looking like they were going to turn in another El Stinko performance on the road against a team they should beat. Well, it turns out they did beat the Jaguars. They came back late, even though it wasn't pretty, and suddenly the Steelers, who were surrounded by all this angst in September, right? Not just because Le'Veon Bell was out, although that didn't help. It was because they were 1-2-1 through 4 games. They tied the Browns, which felt like a loss, I'm sure, for many of you. So it felt like a 1-3 start for the Steelers. And yes, they've had some so-so beginnings to their seasons under Mike Tomlin, but traditionally they do come on late. And traditionally they do win their way through November and December under this current head coach, who's now, by the way, in his 12th season. Can you believe that? It doesn't feel like it's been that long. Not to sound old. Oh, can you believe how long this guy's been coaching? But Tomlin still feels, maybe because he was so young when he was hired, but perhaps he feels a little bit newer than maybe we have any right to consider him being. So in that way, it still feels like he's still establishing himself in some ways. But the one thing we can count on, whether it be in an 8-8 season or a 13-3 season, like we saw last year, is the Steelers traditionally do get better as the season goes along. So now they've won 6 in a row. Now they are back on top in the AFC North. They're looking like they're going to win the AFC North for the 4th time in 5 seasons. There's been turnover. There's been controversy. Last year, you remember how controversial this team was week after week. But here they are again. Maybe the most reliable product in professional sports at this point outside of the New England Patriots. And even the Patriots this year aren't looking so sharp. So just in terms of regular season results, I know the playoffs haven't been what people want, but you have to appreciate in a league where parity is baked in and where it's not designed for teams to succeed year in and year out. Yes, the Pats have hacked that system, but maybe it's not appreciated as much how the Steelers have been able to do that through thick and thin here, through Good seasons and subpar seasons from Ben Roethlisberger. I don't know where I'd put this one. He's come on lately, but the quarterback obviously being the most important position on the field. The defense has been up and down. And overall, we've seen maybe 2 or 3 cores of talent roll through Pittsburgh under Mike Tomlin, but for the most part, they're right there at the end of the season. So I haven't been a huge fan of perhaps the team management from the defensive side of things, but you have to tip your cap and congratulate them and appreciate them on where they are. I know I don't talk about football that much on this show, but make an exception today because I do understand how hard it is to do what the Steelers are doing, looking like it's going to be a 5th straight winning season, a 5th straight season of 10 or more wins is most likely, even with that tie taking away an opportunity for a victory. And Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season. Yes, he's had Ben Roethlisberger every year with him. That helps a lot. If it were Landry Jones for every year of the last 12, they would not have a winning season there. But we have seen good quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers is a pretty good example in Green Bay. They're not always there year in and year out. They're not always as consistent as the Steelers have been. So kudos to them, and I don't expect it to be any different, at least until playoff time. Then, of course, the small sample size kicks in. Perhaps there are some areas in which Tomlin has been outcoached in the playoffs, and maybe that coaching aspect does come into play more in the postseason. But overall, we are fortunate. If you are a football fan, a fan of American football here in Pittsburgh, you already knew you were fortunate, but let's not take that for granted ever because of how seamless the transition has been. And in fact, Tomlin has outperformed his predecessor in Bill Cowher in many ways in consistency. And there's something to be said for consistency, even if you don't have the highest of highs in the Super Bowl wins that you might have wanted to have over the past decade. They haven't come. But at the very least, the Steelers are putting themselves in position. They're knocking at the door. And in my view, that's the most important part of sports or in life. Give yourself the opportunity to succeed at the highest level. You may not always come through because competition is stiff. But that should not take away from the appreciation of what they have done. We've come to the end of another edition of Gike's Got Game here on the River's Edge. Thank you to Brian Crawford for engineering the program, as always, and for lending his personal experience in the second segment of today's show. Thank you for watching and listening each and every week. Happy Thanksgiving. Let me be the last to wish you happy Thanksgiving. And we will move on to the month of, well, not quite actually. We'll wrap up November, if I do my math correctly, next week on Gike's Got Game. Keep it right here on the River's Edge for more great content, music, and talk. I'm proud to be a part of it. I'm thankful to be a part of it. God bless you, and I'll talk to you in 7 days' time.